Okay, next we have Suzanne Desan, who is Phyllis Schinner's Professor of History at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Besides her own monographs, she has contributed chapters to and co-edited a number of things, including with Jeff, Family, Gender, and Law in Early Modern France, and with Lynn Hunt and William Nelson, The French Revolution in Global Perspective. She has recent articles on the French Revolution and the family, and on internationalizing the French Revolution. She has done something truly neat. She describes it as cool if difficult, and that is to record video and audio 48 lectures for the series Great Courses, and hers is called The French Revolution and Napoleon, and it's available on DVD and on CD and streaming, and I think it's fabulous. She's writing a book on the October days, the uprising of 1789, and today her talk is called Seditious Politics on the Eve of the October Days, Voices from the Palais Royal.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first, let me say it's a real honor to be on a panel with these old regime suspects. I should also mention I'm especially grateful to Kate Norberg. We were in the archives together cooking up this panel, and she explained to me how the Châtelet interrogations documents worked, which was incredibly helpful. At almost midnight on the 1st of September, 1789, in the Palais Royal, the Parisian National Guard arrested a tall, skinny priest named the Abbé Bénard. He'd been yelling, "Why should we put up with troops in the Palais Royal? Should free men be jostled by soldiers? We are the ones who should elbow them aside." And the night before, he'd been denouncing the king's possible absolute royal veto. Bad idea. The National Guardsmen were attempting to put down seditious politics in the Palais Royal because only a couple of days earlier, on the 30th of August, a déclassé nobleman and rabble-rouser named the Marquis de Saint-Érouge had led a band of some 1,500 men, some armed, some not, out of the Palais Royal. They planned to march out to Versailles to tell the National Assembly that under no circumstances should they give the king an absolute veto. The veto does not belong to a single man, but to 25 million. Lafayette's guardsmen stopped them on the outskirts of Paris. Now, back in Paris in early September, they rounded up a handful of seditious-seeming characters in the Palais Royal to take them to Châtelet, to dump them into a carton for me to look at, with Kate's help, of course. These included an unemployed cook, a few former soldiers, the son of a horse merchant, a journeyman roofer, a tinsmith, an apprentice locksmith. But the one who caught my eye was the Abbé Bénard. Because of his pockets, they listed what he had in his pockets. So what did he have in his pockets? Several newspapers, a pamphlet about bread, a romantic poem addressed to Tendre Annette. I mean, he's a priest, but he's French. And on the back of the list of the poem, he has a list of the names and addresses of women. He also has an advertising flyer for the procession, a religious procession to Sainte Geneviève, and various other items that I have not yet been able to interpret. Okay, now why am I interested in his pockets, or what am I trying to do in this talk? I want to think about the agitation in the Palais Royal, and I'm especially interested in it because various historians have pointed out that this was like a dress rehearsal. The 30th August attempt to get to Versailles was like a forerunner of the October days 6 weeks later. The one led by men failed, the one led by women succeeded. So that in itself is good news. But that's actually not the spirit of my project on the October days, because one thing I'm interested in trying to figure out from the Palais Royal is I'm interested in the connections among the men in the Palais Royal and the female marchers. I'm also interested in my book in paying more attention to the crucial role of men. There are about 500 civilian It seems working class men who follow the women out to Versailles. There are thousands more who come out there all day. The National Guard follow later in the day. The Volontaires de la Bastille, who are a kind of paramilitary group, actually follow the women or bring up the rear of their cortege on the 5th. So this seems important to look at and think about. So I'm going to start with Besnard and his women. That particular part of his pockets point to a kind of tantalizing connection, personal networks perhaps, between the men in the Palais Royal and the women, because when he's interrogated and asked, who are these women? Why do you have them here? He says that these are women who they're friends of his sister, and he intends to invite them to participate in a ritual procession to the Church of Sainte-Geneviève. Now, as other historians have pointed out, on the eve of the October days in August and September, there were regularly religious processions led by women, market women, working women, to the patron saint of Paris, Sainte Geneviève, that formed a kind of political and ritual precursor to the October days as well. They were definitely political because not only did they thank the saint for bread and for protection, but then they would go to the Hôtel de Ville and they would thank Lafayette and the Municipal Assembly in a ritualized, very polite way. But this was also a kind of politics of gratitude exercising pressure. I'll read you just what some of Katie Jarvis's women said. We are certain, this is to Lafayette and company, we are certain that you will find effective ways to replace famine with abundance and arbitrary despotism with enlightened justice. Now, these processions, these religious processions, got bigger in size, bigger in geographic scope of their march, more frequent. The biggest one in mid-September included about 1,000 to 1,200 men and women from the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, also National Guardsmen, also Volontaires de la Bastille, exactly the groups who would soon participate in the October days. So finding that list in Besnard's pockets was one of those great archival moments. That's when I decided, let's have a panel. Because I thought it would be a good start for a paper. But if they suggest kind of interconnections between these male agitators and the female marchers, his pockets also suggest another thing I'm interested in, which is layers of intertwined political interests among men and women. And one of the things I want to do in my project is break down our tendency to see the October Days actors all acting according to silos of interest. The women care about bread. The deputies care about the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. The National Guard care about getting to guard the king instead of letting the royal bodyguards do it. So let's just take bread. No historians flat out say that men are unconcerned about bread, but they often write as if that is only women's cause. But Besnard's pockets had a pamphlet on bread. And over half the men arrested in this sweep-up in the Palais Royal had spoken out about bread. Let's listen to Jacques Arrivel, the journeyman roofer. He was arrested for having said, "I still don't have any bread, and sometimes I have to go to bed without supper." He blames Lafayette for stopping the mills from grinding and says, "Lafayette is a traitor who is weaving his own rope. We have to hang him." Now, you'd think that he would be severely punished for making such a threat, but he manages to get off the hook by protesting that he was so drunk he didn't know what he was doing. He's obviously trying out for the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm being recorded. Okay.
That means we all have to agree.
All right, let's go back to the men in the Palais Royal. The political agitation against this possible royal veto. Now, there are some 6,000 men and women thronging in the Palais Royal, and they're talking about politics, talking about the veto. Now, Besnard knows about politics, we know from his pockets, because he has 6 copies of the newspaper The Point du Jour, which it's a slightly boring newspaper that gives matter-of-fact accounts of the debates out at the National Assembly. He's also listening to rumors, and he's reading about them because interestingly, the Patriot Press sometimes publishes rumors. He has in his pocket the journal La Révolution de Paris by the Patriot journalist Loustalot, who lists a swirl of rumors about the veto. And on the night of the 30th of August, dynamic orators like the Marquis de Saint-Rouge fire up the crowd by attacking the veto and spewing out rumors. The aristocracy and the clergy are going to give the king a royal veto so that he can smash the revolution and so that he can hang anyone he wants, lickety-split. The Austrian emperor has an army of 100,000 men massing on the border to invade France. Or maybe worst of all, Mirabeau has been run through with a sword because of his support of the people. Now, Mirabeau is actually in favor of the royal veto, but the crowd nonetheless decides, the cry goes up, we need to send a guard out to Versailles to protect Mirabeau. We need 200 patriots to protect him. And we have to go get the king and go get the Dauphin and bring them back to Paris. Now that really struck me because what I'm seeing emerging in these politics in the Palais Royal is there is a notion collectively developing there that the job of the Parisian crowd is to pressure and protect revolutionary authorities. They should pressure and protect the deputies, protect those who are on their side, pressure the king, but also protect him. They are developing this idea out. It's an idea that comes out of the old regime, although it's changed in various ways. It's different. It's a different context, in part because royal power has declined so steeply, and there are new revolutionary ideas circulating, and also new revolutionary institutions to access, like the Guard, the district assemblies, the Paris Municipal Assembly, the National Assembly out at Versailles. So first point, this politics of pressuring and protecting revolutionary authorities. But there's a second point that I see here and that I want to highlight. And here I'm building on Micah Alpaugh's important work on nonviolence. I want to argue that there is actually a crucial tension that emerges, that the line between nonviolence and violence is actually quite thin, and that for this revolutionary moment there's actually a crucial tension, simmering tension, that is important between collective violent action, almost bodily collective violent action, and taking official moves, trying to approach official revolutionary institutions and put pressure on them. On August 30th, there's continual debate. Should we go to the districts? Can we get the National Guards on our side? Should we go to the Hôtel de Ville, to the Paris Municipal Assembly? And they send 4 delegations there over the course of 2 days. Or maybe, should we just go straight to Versailles? Now, intriguingly, the fiery orators who heat up the crowd also decide that they should take action. They should make themselves an official political group. Saint-Rouge will later call the Palais Royal the 61st District, in other words, claiming that it had the status of the district assemblies of Paris. But for now, they call themselves the Société du Palais Royal. They draw up a formal motion faite au Palais Royal, which includes the formalized comment deliberated in the Palais Royal on the 30th of August, 1789. Now, the Declaration of the Rights of Man is only 4 days old at this point, but the motion begins by invoking Article 11 and the freedom of speech. They also say in this motion that they will recall corrupt and ignorant deputies. You see the beginnings at this moment also of appeals, for direct democracy. But in their motion, they also threaten the deputies. They also include a letter to the president of the National Assembly, who's Lally Tollendal, a monarchien or conservative figure. So they warn him and his fellow deputies about the veto. 1,500 men are ready to light up your chateau and your houses, especially yours. That's And although the crowd of some 1,500 is turned back, there are 2 delegates who managed to get this letter out to Versailles and frighten the National Assembly. Now, if you turn to the level of individuals arrested, one sees a similar combination of a kind of, let's say they're arrested for particular political issues like denouncing the royal veto. You see also a combination of the language of rights and revolutionary entitlements with the language of honor, anger, and threats. Take this guy, Etienne Routier, who claims he's a baron. He's arrested for giving speeches about bread and secret municipal maneuvers. He angrily claimed that he had the right, quote, to read anything he wants in public, and cannons won't stop me. Any nation too weak to defend rights is not worthy of liberty. He also threatened that he would blow the brains out of anyone who arrested him, if only he had a gun. Tanto points to actually one last issue which I want to raise, which is the issue of the Guard and the kind of military groups at this moment. He himself is a down on his luck former soldier. He actually he wanted to get into the paid National Guard but was unable to do so, and he's angry about that. This is a moment when there appears to be a lot of strife and uncertainty about the makeup of the Guard and other kind of auxiliary troops in Paris at the moment. Lafayette, the commander of the National Guard, is at this moment using the Guard, working on figuring out how to use the Guard, not just to keep the peace, but also to keep the peace by integrating various troublemaking individuals into the Guard. The next day, the Marquis de Saint-Rouge, who was leading the insurrection on the 30th, on the 31st, he shows up in a National Guard uniform to patrol and keep the peace. And Lafayette has integrated into the Guard the French Guard, who stormed the Bastille and were kind of rebel royal soldiers, but he does not integrate the law clerks of the Bazoches, who had been troublemakers in the pre-revolutionary period. And it's only after the October days that he integrates into the Guard another paramilitary group, the Volontaires de la Bastille. So this is a moment of flux regarding the role of the Guard, the makeup of the militia, and sort of tension about who's in and who's out. And I just can't resist saying, I wish you would put that red jacket back on, because you look just like a Swiss Guardsman when you had that on. Anyhow, a lot of the guys who are picked up in early September are engaged in issues having to do with the Guard and the militia. Our journeyman roofer, the drunken guy, he had falsely enrolled in the Guard, pretending to be of higher social status than he was. One self-proclaimed count had been arrested for impersonating the aide-de-camp of Lafayette, complete with full uniform and actually commanding patrols and trying to requisition arms at the Hôtel de Ville for the 30th of August insurgency. Another individual, an unemployed cook, was arrested for trying to form a kind of military corps of servants who were hoping to be able to kick out of Paris the servants from Savoie, their rivals. And he was threatening that for sure they could beat the Jean Foutre of a National Guardsman. It's his language, not mine. Besnard is also worried about the French Guard. About the National Guard. Actually, his attitude about the Guard is very complicated. On the one hand, he's opposed to there being large patrols of guardsmen within the Palais Royal, putting a lid on things, but at the same time, he has actually lobbied hard in favor of the French Guard, and he, on August 31st, was urging the crowd in a second attempt to go out to Versailles, to go get district National Guardsmen, armed guardsmen, and take them with them, go with them to Versailles if possible. He doesn't succeed, of course, in winning over the guardsmen, and the next day he gets arrested. But 6 weeks later, the National Guard is following the women, and the Volontaires de la Bastille are there as well. There are obviously differences of things that happen, especially the cockade trampling on October 1st. I haven't really figured this part out, but it seems to me it's important to think about the tensions over the National Guard as one of the issues that's politicizing these men in the Palais Royal, and that's relevant for thinking about the October days agitation. Only men of a certain class could get into the Guard, so the issue of who's in, who's out, how should policing work, these seem important. There's a key question that's important now and certainly through the October days. What role should armed corps, whether official or unofficial, play in promoting patriotism and promoting revolutionary political agendas and in channeling violence? Okay, now let me draw some conclusions. There are some direct causal connections between the Palais Royal incident and the October days. It is the out in Versailles. There's anxiety about Paris, which causes both the National Assembly and the king to consider the idea of moving farther from the capital to Compiègne, to Soissons, and rumors about that back in Paris stir up agitation among the people. It's also anxiety about Paris, which produces the call of the Flanders Regiment, and the Flanders Regiment are the guys who, along with the Royal Bodyguard, apparently trampled on the tricolored cockade on October 1st, sparking anger that leads to the October days. And there was agitation within the Palais Royal on October 4th that would help ignite the uprising on the 5th. But I'm also trying to suggest more intangible, less direct connections, particularly on certain points. Can possibly, at least suggestions of connections or networks between the Palais Royal agitators and the market women, zones of intersecting political ideas among women and among men, and above all, this development of a style of collective politics which is designed to simultaneously pressure and protect the king and revolutionary institutions with arms if necessary. A style of politics where collective action draws energy from this simmering tension between the threat of violence or possible violence and working with official channels with delegations to these new revolutionary institutions like the districts, the Paris municipality, the National Assembly. Abbé Bénard is still going to be in prison on October 5th, but the contents of his pockets, they will leap into action on October 5th in the October Days Journée.